Hey, Dave Staublin here. We're going to do a little unit circle math and go from unit circle into the sine curve and the sine function and the equation. So over here, we've got a unit circle. The radius is 1. And you remember each of these points has an x value and a y value. So to get from the center out to the circle, you go an x distance and a y distance, and you end up with an xy coordinate. And we know that if we wanted to graph the sine, which would be opposite over hypotenuse, or the y values as a function of theta, we could do that. And so when you're at 0 degrees, the y value is 0. And then as we move from 0 to 90 degrees, the y value gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it reaches 1. And then as you move around here, that y value goes back to 0. And then as you continue to move around, it goes down to -1 and then back to 0. Now, what happens if instead of going positive, what if we go the other direction? Well, at 0 degrees, the y value of that point is 0. And as we move down this way, the y value gets bigger and bigger until at -90, it equals -1, and then it goes back to 0 again as you rotate to 180. And what you'll find is that as you go around the circle multiple times in either direction, this keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. All right, so this sine function can be modeled by this equation, and I'm going to explain what all these values are. But there is one thing I want you to know, that a sine curve or a sine function always starts in the middle here and goes up. Okay, so here's what we need to know. This a value right here, if you take the absolute value of that number in front of the sine, that is the amplitude. And the amplitude is the distance from the center line up to the max, or the center line down to the min. So that distance is A. Then the next thing is this letter B. And this B is defined as the number of cycles in 360 degrees. Or if we were doing in radians, it would be the number of cycles in 2 pi. So, for example, here is 0 and here's 360, and this sine function goes up, back to 0, back, and then it repeats. That's 1 cycle in 360 degrees. So for this curve, B is 1. Now, along with B, you'll remember from a previous lesson that there is this thing called the period. And the period is the length of the curve. That's the distance from the beginning to where it starts over again. And the period is equal to 360 degrees divided by B. So, like in this case, B we said was 1. 360 divided by 1 is 360, and that's how long it is. If we were in radians, it would be 2 pi divided by B. Okay? Now, the next thing is this letter H, and this H is called a phase shift. And phase is a fancy word for horizontal. So it's a horizontal shift. So it's possible that instead of this sine curve starting at 0, it could start at negative 45. And it could, be shifted to the side. And so in that case, the phase shift would be a negative 45 degrees. Lastly, there is this letter K, and this is the vertical shift. And normally, the sine function starts at 0 up and down, but it's possible that we could shift it upwards, and then, we could have something that looks like that. All right, so that's the equation. At this point, I'm going to stop this video, and we'll have more information in the next videos.